This message comes from NPR sponsor Rosetta Stone, an expert in language learning for 30 years. Right now, NPR listeners can get Rosetta Stone's lifetime membership to 25 different languages for 50% off. Learn more at rosettastone.com/NPR.
Hey everyone, Parker here. Before we get into this week's episode of the show, a little bit of news. Code Switch is coming to Arkansas. We're going to be performing a live show in Little Rock on December 7th. We'll be sharing more information about that, including where to get your tickets, really soon. But in the meantime, we need your help. We'll have portions of the show with our famous Ask Code Switch segment, where we answer listener questions about how to deal with racial questions that come up in your own life. They can be silly, serious, social, personal. We want to hear them all. So please, send us your questions, especially if you're from Arkansas or live in Arkansas or want to know something about racial dynamics in Arkansas. My co-host and I will choose some of these questions to answer live on stage. So if you want to hear our brilliant musings, reporting, and advice, email us at codeswitch@npr.org with your questions. Subject line, Ask Code Switch. Again, that's codeswitch@npr.org. Subject line, Ask Code Switch. Alrighty, on to the show. Hey everyone, you're listening to Code Switch. I'm B.A. Parker. Just a warning, there's some salty language and very loud rock music in this episode. In my teens and early 20s, I dabbled in the punk scene. The scene had a level of chaos I could work with while still going to church on Sunday. I lean against the wall and nod my head to aggressively loud hardcore music, giving no care to lifelong eardrum damage, and just rock out to myself. And through the sweat and the noise and the darkness, I'd find the one or two other black kids in the room, and it gave me comfort. And every once in a while, I'd get up the nerve to go into the pit. It didn't feel safe by any means, but I would feel galvanized. The first time I got into a mosh pit, my date shoved me and encouraged me to shove him back. There was this transference of energy. I couldn't explain it. But in my experience, the volatility of mostly white mosh pits always forced me to do some kind of cost-benefit analysis. My need for community versus gauging the intentions of a drunk white person wanting to dive at me in a crowd. That didn't feel fun or freeing. My guard would stay up. Then I experienced the freedom of a black mosh pit. Plus-size black femmes having a twerk circle to the gnarliest bass chords you've ever heard.
That's the plus side of being in black punk circles, is no one's just beating the shit out of each other.
300-pound white men trying to kill you for no reason.
God.
Yeah.
Recently, I went to a black punk show in Brooklyn with a friend, fellow journalist Ahia Netta Argan.
I don't know if you saw the girl who walked out as I was walking in, but we had on essentially the same outfit, and I think we are going to the same event.
I mean, there was two black people in dog collars. I would assume we were all going to the same show.
Yeah,
Here I was, a decade removed from the black punk scene, but all of the hallmarks were still there. Dog collars, anime t-shirts, and Doc Martens. I'm only guilty of the last one.
Do we think this is the sound check, or do we think they're just going?
Either or. I'm down.
Then alas, there was the pit. Here's how it works. A person runs in a circle, basically cordoning it off, letting everyone know that this space is for moshing. And then there was a larger black girl who stomped on the floor. Others joined her, gleefully shoving each other and jumping around. When someone would fall, she'd immediately help them up and they'd go back to jumping around again. That was new, the helping people, the lack of fear. It felt like a correction. And I was reminded of a quote that said, "What is more liberating than a mosh pit full of smiling black faces?" It comes from James Spooner. About 20 years ago, he co-created the music festival Afropunk and directed the documentary of the same name. How would you describe the feeling of a punk show or like the pit?
I mean, in most cases, you're at a show and the energy from the stage is so powerful that it forces you to move in a certain way. And slam dancing or moshing is like the way that makes sense for that kind of music. At the same time, I'm like creeping up on 50 years old, so I'm not typically in the pit anymore.
No?
Old guys in the back, I mean, I'm sensible enough to know or to foresee what could happen to me if I go in the mosh pit. And those are not the kind of things you think about when you're in your teens and 20s. So, if I go to a show with my daughter who's 14, like I'll push her in or, when she was younger, maybe like 11 or 12, I would like run in and like try to assess out the circle pit and try to figure out like this is a safe time for me to run in there with my little one. But, now she's at age where she just jumps in by herself.
Baby's first pit. All right.
Yeah, it's bonding moments,
Like a week or so ago, I went to a punk show I hadn't been in a while. I went to the Secret History of Black Punk show in Williamsburg.
Oh, amazing.
It was really fun. And like I hadn't seen community like that in a while. But then there was like, I realized the same thing that you had. Like maybe maybe I'm not ready for the pit anymore. There was a kid who was performing on stage, and then he thrusted himself off of the stage and face planted onto hardwood floor.
Sweetie, are you okay?
He went, oh, my face.
Okay. All right, trigger happy, take two. Apologies, folks.
There's definitely an art to stage diving. And, it's like any other dance. If you're just going to like wing it, you might get hurt, like don't go out there and do the dirty wine without knowing how to like swing your head around without breaking your neck,
I wanted so much to get him some ice, but he just like kept doing the set. And I was like, you're like 22. You're going to be in your 30s and you're going to have all this arthritis and you won't know what happened. But, you live, you learn. I sat down with James Spooner because I wanted to hear about how he helped document the Black punk scene and hear about his new book. He, along with Chris L. Terry, created an anthology of writings, comics, and interviews from multiple generations of Black punks. It's called Black Punk Now. What was your entry to punk music and the punk scene?
I got into it. I lived in a small town in Southern California in the desert. And I was a skater, and this was like the late 80s. So punk was very much like the soundtrack of skateboarding and skateboard videos. So eventually I went to the mall and like bought Black Flag tape and like a Sex Pistols tape and, like the kind of like Punk 101 bands that you could buy at the mall. And then my first day of 8th grade, I met another Black punk. And that was just a life-changing moment, just to see him. It validated my interest. And in my mind, he was the coolest kid in the school. So I wanted to be just like him.
That's cool. I mean, that's enviable. It took so long for me to find other Black kids who were interested in what I was interested in.
Oh, yeah. And I'm not saying like it was smooth sailing from there. Like, it was just me and him and then a bunch of Nazis, And then I moved to New York and the Nazis went away, but there was a whole other set of problems.
Yeah. I grew up in Baltimore. And the first punk show I went to, me and my date were the only Black people. And we realized that there were some voluntarily bald white people within the group that we were in. And I was like, oh no. And like a girl stomped on my wrist when I fell in the pit.
Oh no.
I was like,
on purpose?
Unclear.
Yeah.
But it felt on purpose.
It could go either way.
Yeah. But punk music became like a big soundtrack for my teen years, but also feeling the need to like find Black folks within that music.
Yeah.
Like being really excited to learn that like Pat Smear was Black or like, so, I mean, it's always Bad Brains. And like, Polly Stare, like searching and clinging for Black people within the punk music that I enjoyed.
Yeah, I mean, that need for validation is super real. And I think that, when you see shows like that Secret History, it's kind of a testimony to how far we've come. Because, growing up in New York, there was a small scene of Black punk and hardcore bands, but they certainly weren't verbal about being Black hardcore bands. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
So when I was like 15, I found an all-Black band called Bushman from New York. And they completely changed the way I looked at myself. It was just like for the first time, I was like, oh, here's the example of how to be Black and punk at the same time. Mm-hmm. And obviously, everybody in the room knows that those dudes on stage are the coolest people in the room. Like that guy with the one long green dread, that's my North Star, Mm-hmm. And shortly after that, I grew dreads, and I was like, I felt a certain sense of like pride in my Blackness because I found a way to do Blackness in a way that like suited me, that made sense for me, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Can I be like fully honest with you?
Yeah, that's what we're here for.
Yeah, something that I know I was guilty of as a teenager, and it's something that I've always get concerned about when talking about this, is because there tends to be this kind of like futile back and forth sometimes with a lot of alternative Black kids. I know that like I had this problem of like, oh, well, Black kids didn't get me, white kids didn't get me, and it ends up feeling anti-Black and weirdly exceptionalizing ourselves in just another, for like lack of a better term, like white supremacist space. And it feels like a different kind of respectability, but just like this time like in Doc Martens.
Yeah.
And
no, I think that's right.
Did you ever feel like you had that internal external conflict?
100%. The New York hardcore scene is negative in a lot of ways. There was a lot of misogyny, a lot of homophobia, just a lot of, kind of like gang mentality, just stuff that I wasn't into. So I found a more political scene out in the tri-state area suburbs. And there it was like, oh, this is very like political, very like really smart. Like, people are like, vegan, and, it felt very like in line with like the politics that I was gaining. But the compromise was that I was around a bunch of white kids. Like this was literally a space where it was like, I'm the only Black person in the room, or the only person of color in the room, or maybe there's two, but we're not talking to each other or about it,
Yeah.
And then that's where the self-hate starts coming in, because you want to be like your friends. You want to like fit in. And, while all these kids in the late 90s were getting these like Spock-like emo haircuts,
Ooh.
I had dreads, and I didn't look like them. And then when I would talk about my experiences in New York, like on the subway, getting like harassed and beaten up by, Black folks on the train, like those were experiences that they could not relate to. And those were experiences that embarrassed me. So there was like a self-hatred that came with just being submerged in whiteness.
Yeah.
And I think that there either needed to be the other extreme, which was like creating an all-Black punk space, or some kind of middle ground where I am both secure in my Blackness, like have experienced Black joy, have a real sense of pride in being Black, and then I can like kind of more comfortably hang out with white people, I feel like the 70s, 80s, 90s internal dialogue of POC punks was like, we're here, but we are not. Like, you don't have to, like, we don't want to make our white friends uncomfortable by talking about race, you know? So the conversation around race was usually limited to like, fuck Nazis. which is great.
Yeah.
But what are you doing on the other days? You know, when I made the documentary Afropunk in 2003, it was certainly the first time that I ever heard any kind of I'm Black and I'm proud in the punk scene. And I think that Afropunk was kind of the first wave of saying, like, no, like, there is a unique Black punk experience, and we want to talk about that.
How did you come around to making the documentary? Because I remember watching it like at 19 and be like, oh, this is really helpful.
Yeah. I made the documentary because I needed to make the documentary. You know, I needed to see it. I needed to, like, basically I was going through a bit of a identity crisis in my early 20s. I'm like mixed race, I'm light skinned, I had a perm. You know, there were like people who didn't even know that I was Black. So it's like I was passing, but I wasn't like on trying to on purpose, but I just, you know, I felt the effects of all that. And at a certain point, I just started getting angry. And I went to St. Lucia, where my family's from, and kind of had this like awakening. And then I came back to New York and I started talking to my friends of color who were in the kind of like New York nightlife rock scene I was part of. And the conversations were just so vivid. It was like we were all going through this alone. Like nobody wanted to talk about it, or nobody felt comfortable talking about it. But when I like set up a camera, all of a sudden everybody was like, oh my God, I have all these stories. And the more that I talked to people, the more that I realized, like, I have to string this together. I need to make this documentary so that future generations don't have to deal with what we're dealing with, you know?
For sure. Seems to be this universal experience of feeling like being Black punk was an oxymoron, that somehow you were, like, quote, like being Black wrong.
Yes.
But being able to flip that switch and say that being Black is the most punk thing I can do. How did that shift happen for you? Was it making the documentary?
I mean, I was basically doing like intensive therapy for a couple years while I, you know, in just making this movie. You know, I'm doing like group therapy with like 80 some odd other Black punks, and then spending 8 hours a day watching their interviews, stringing it all together and reinforcing this idea that like this is a valid Black experience. And that's not something that we're told very often, you know, as young Black punks, like, oh, you're having a very valid Black experience. It's mostly like, you know, why are you trying to be white? You know, that's mostly the feedback we get.
Did it help you find community, or like a larger community?
When I started screening the film, within the first couple screenings, I started meeting people who were not punk, who were like what I would think of as just kind of like regular mainstream Black people, you know, who were like, yo, that's my experience too. Like, I'm the only Black person at my job, you know? Like, once this conversation was opened up by the film, I started realizing that, like, oh, this is a Black experience. It's just not the one that I'm seeing on TV, you know? And then once, on my 1 year anniversary of screening the film, it was like I did 120 some odd screenings. I was like, oh, I want to do an event. Like, I want to do like a party and have bands, you know, like we'll show the movie, we'll have bands. And when I did that, like I can look up that date and be like, this is when for lack of a better word, I'll call it the Afropunk community started. Like, obviously what the Afropunk community is today is much different than what it was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But then it was just like, this is where the Black punk community begins.
Coming up, how the Black punk community begins to get corporatized.
I mean, Without even throwing shade, like, Afropunk is a multi-million-dollar brand. And the community who built it were gentrified out.
Stay with us.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Monumental from PRX, a new weekly podcast that explores questions about the past, present, and future of U.S. monuments, uncovering the stories about what and who is important, as well as the stories that have been left out. Join host Ashley C. Ford across the country with their team of independent producers. Listen on Mondays wherever you get your podcasts.
Support for NPR comes from FX, presenting A Murder at the End of the World, starring Emma Corrin, Clive Owen, and Britt Marling. Emma plays Darby Hart, a sleuth and tech-savvy hacker. She joins an exclusive group invited to a retreat. When one of the guests is found dead, Darby must prove it was murder before the killer takes another life. FX's A Murder at the End of the World, streaming November 14th only on Hulu.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Apple Card. Earn 3% daily cash back when you use Apple Card to buy a new iPhone 15, AirPods, or any products at Apple. And automatically grow your daily cash at 4.15% annual percentage yield when you open a savings account. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app on iPhone. Subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Savings accounts by Goldman Sachs Bank USA. Member FDIC. Terms apply.
We all know that sitting for hours of screen time is bad, but can we fix it?
I think a lot of us don't realize how much pain we live in because of our interactions with computing.
Ultimately, it's a culture change.
NPR's Body Electric, a special interactive series investigating the relationship between our tech and our bodies. Listen in the TED Radio Hour feed wherever you get your podcasts.
Parker, just Parker. Code switch. As a teenager, I had this dream of one day moving to New York City and going to Afropunk. It seemed like an alternative Black person's mecca, where I'd find Black punk kids like me. So I grew up, moved to NYC, and finally went to Afropunk, only to realize the Black punk kids had been relegated to something called the Pink Stage. It was in a skate park outside of the festival. We'd been segregated. I spoke with James Spooner, co-creator of Afropunk, about the search for Black community within the punk space, and how the Afropunk Festival that he'd helped build got co-opted by the mainstream. So you co-created Afropunk. Tell me what that was, and like, what was the goal?
So I made the film. I co-created the festival, right? So if you ask me what the goal is, and you ask my partner at the time what the goal is, you got slightly different answers. For me, I wanted to, like, validate the Black punk experience. I wanted to just create space for us to be ourselves and feel good about that. It was really simple. Let's get Black bands on stage, let's put Black people in the audience, and let's have a good time. You know, for him, it was about building a brand, getting bands signed, making money, you know? So our paths diverged in 2008. I left the Afropunk company, and if you look at what Afropunk is today, you can see that there are remnants of what I wanted, you know?
Yeah.
But there's a whole lot more of what he wanted.
Yeah, because I was going to ask, did you feel like it got away from you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Without even throwing shade, like, Afropunk is a multi-million-dollar brand that the musical focus is alt R&B, you know? You'd be hard-pressed to find a rock band anymore. And the community who built it were gentrified out. The focus was not about them, it was not for them, and it became for a different group of people. And a different group of people who also needed it. So there's a part of me that can't get mad at slightly less underground maybe queer, maybe people who just want to fly their freak flag for the weekend, like,
Yeah.
My aunties, like whoever, like whoever it is that goes to Afropunk today, like they have a good time. You know what I'm saying? Like I can't get mad at that, but I can also recognize like it's owned by Essence magazine now, or the guy who owns Essence.
Is it
magazine.
really?
Yeah. So Afropunk is Essence Fest Alt Edition, like plain and simple. This is just about marketing. And for that reason, it's fine. It's as fine as Coachella or any other festival, but it's also irrelevant to the punk scene. To answer your question about it getting away from me, yeah, there was a lot of years where I was like salty and felt betrayed and hurt. But that started to shift when I saw that the punk scene, that like the next generation of 20-something Black kids were reacting and saying like, oh, this isn't for us. So they started creating their own thing. And the ultimate irony is that I got what I wanted through the underground, but I had to give them something to react to because that's what punks do.
Yeah.
Like, we're nothing if we're not reacting,
So you and Chris L. Terry just came out with a book called Black Punk Now. How would you describe it?
Well, it's a anthology of Black punk writers. It's fiction, nonfiction, comics. So the stories, they run the gamut. There's fairy tales, there's horror, there's sci-fi, there's interviews. We really wanted to kind of show how expansive the Black punk experience is, yet contain it in this book that allows you to see the threads,
Does the book retcon some of your feelings about punk? Like, are you trying to take back some of what capitalism stole from punk with this book?
I think I'm always trying to take back what capitalism has stolen from punk,
Yeah.
And again, this isn't a new thing, like I saw an ad from JCPenney's from like 1980 that was like punk summer, and it was like, like people wearing these like, hot pink t-shirts or whatever, it's like punk has been exploited by capitalism since the Sex Pistols. So it's like, this is just the push and pull of the underground and the mainstream. And I find a certain beauty in it. Punk can't exist without something to react to.
Yeah.
And the mainstream can't exist without stealing from the underground. It's a cycle. Like without the underground, the mainstream has no soul. And without the mainstream, the underground has nothing to rebel against.
Okay, so in the book, your contribution is a comic about watching your daughter become interested in the same music that you did growing up.
Mm-hmm.
What's it like being able to share that part of yourself with her and to share the scene and the music with her?
I'm so thankful that I have this in common with my kid, because it could have really gone any way. My other daughter, who I love as much as, they're both my kids. I love them both.
Please note.
And also my younger daughter is 9. I expect her to only like pop music, Like when my older daughter, who is now 14, was 9, she also only liked pop music. So it's fine. But it was during lockdown, I think, that she was in her room and then she came out of her room and she's like, guys, have you ever heard of Smashing Pumpkins?
Ooh.
And I was just like, I was just crying. Like I just started crying right now, because it was just so sweet. It's like, yeah, we saw them last year, like whatever. But like to walk into her room and be like, oh, what are you doing right now? Oh, I'm just looking up Nirvana facts, And now, a few years later removed from that, she's introducing me to punk bands. I'm literally wiping away tears, like I love it. It's amazing,
That's lovely. Meanwhile, I let my dad listen to one Rage Against the Machine song, and he was like, "Are you a socialist?" And I was like, that's neither here nor there. Ooh, does she feel the need to react against you?
I mean, she does in her own ways, for sure, And we kind of have like an agreement. I take her to concerts, whenever I can, when she can bring a friend. And then it's just like we walk in the door and it's like, all right, I'll see you later, Because I know she doesn't want to like hang out with me. Like, we'll talk about the show later. But like, she wants to have a different experience, like the same experience I wanted to have at that age. She wants to scam on boys. She wants to like get in the pit with a friend. She won't get in the pit with me. She wants to get in the pit with her friend. And I want that experience for her.
I love that. Just like, no, Dad, I don't want to get in the pit with you.
Yeah, come on. So, we just walk in and we're like, all right, see you later.
And one last thing. I hear you've got a museum exhibit in Las Vegas that goes along with the book?
Yes, the Black Punk Now exhibit that runs through March is happening in conjunction with the release of the Black Punk Now book. And I think it's really important that we can have an exhibit like this. There's going to be literally thousands of people who go to the museum with the expectation of seeing early Ramones t-shirts or like flyers from Minor Threat or whatever, but stumble into this room that's just hella black. Not only black bands, but like I have a whole wall that's just crowd shots. Like we've all seen pictures of Bad Brains. Like we know that black bands exist, but what we don't all know is that there can be a room with 300 people and most of them are black.
And that's our show. You can follow us on Instagram at NPR Code Switch. If email is more your thing, ours is codeswitch@npr.org. And subscribe to the podcast at the NPR app or wherever you get your podcasts. And you should definitely check out our newsletter. It drops every Friday in your inbox. Sign up for that at npr.org/codeswitch newsletter. Just wanted to give a quick shout out to our Code Switch Plus listeners. We appreciate you and thank you for being a subscriber. Subscribing to Code Switch Plus means getting to listen to all of our episodes without any sponsor breaks. It also helps support our show. So if you love our work, please consider signing up at plus.npr.org/codeswitch. This episode is produced by Courtney Stein and Xavier Lopez. It was edited by Dahlia Mortada. Our engineer was Josephine Nionai. And a big shout out to the rest of the Code Switch Massive. Christina Kalla, Jess Kung, Leah Dinella, Verlin Williams, Steve Drummond, Lori Lizaraga, and Gene Demby. With special thanks to Ahianeta Aryan, Honeychild Coleman, Reagan Buchanan and her Secret History of Black Punk show, and Chris L. Terry. I'm B.A. Parker. Hydrate.
This message comes from NPR sponsor GiveWell. There are over 1.5 million nonprofit organizations in the United States and millions more around the world. How do you know which ones can make a big impact with your donation? GiveWell was founded to help donors with that question. You can find all of their research and recommendations on their site for free. If you've never donated through GiveWell before, get your donation matched. Go to givewell.org and pick podcast and enter NPR at checkout.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. OCI is the platform for database, application development, and AI needs. Train your AI models at twice the speed and half the cost. Take a free test drive at oracle.com/NPR.
Economic phenomena are all around us, and what better place to find that than the buffet?
This feels like a buffet amusement park.
We head to Vegas to not only learn how to buffet the right way, but also gorge ourselves on economics.
Chicken cassoulet.
Ooh.
really a child. Eat your heart out.
It's an all-you-can-eat economics-a-thon this week on Planet Money from NPR.